So thanks for taking the time to be here. I'm not going to do any lengthy introductions. Some of you will know me already, some of you don't know me. I will share my bio after the session. I'll put it in chat. Obviously, you can find a lot of information about me on LinkedIn as well. I'm a trainer and a speaker and an advisor on innovation and design thinking, among other disciplines. Now, I'd like to start today with a piece of music. So bear with me here. I'll try and hopefully that will come through all right. If you don't hear anything, then let me know in the chat. So let's kick things off with a little bit of music.
It's the end of the world as we know it. I feel fine. That's great, it starts with an earthquake, birds, snakes, and aeroplanes. Yeah, Lenny Bruce is not afraid. I am a hurricane, listen to yourself, turn world to its own needs. Dummies, save your own hit, speed it up and not speed, got no street, the ladder starts to clatter with the fear, fight down, high fire in a fire, represent the southern gangs from the government for hire in a combat site. Listen what's coming in a hurry with the furies breathing down your neck. Team reporters got the Trump hit the ground, look at that low plane, flying then overflow population corner blue, but it'll do secret seven worlds in your own need. Listen to your heartbeat. Tell me that the reds are in the reverend with the right. You patriotic, snap light right. I'm feeling pretty psyched. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. I feel fine.
Okay, that's better. All right, if that was confusing, way too fast, and you have absolutely no idea what just happened, then that's a great metaphor for the state of the world and the state of many people's minds today. We live in confusing times, and most companies and organizations are around the world are trying to anticipate and predict the future and their place in it. And so there are a lot of global issues to resolve. We can barely afford our energy, and there's no short-term solution in sight. We've got a war on the edge of Europe, and there's also no short-term solution in sight, it looks like. COVID is currently ripping through 1.4 billion Chinese people, and so it could mutate again at any point. Inflation is eating our holiday, our shopping, and our leisure budgets. That's a fact. Automation and robots are starting to steal our jobs faster and faster at an increasing rate. The stock markets are starting to shake, and they've been shaking for a little while. And to top everything off, our populations are aging at a very fast rate. That's right, you are getting old. So it sounds like we have a lot of challenges to overcome, right? I think we all agree on that. But even with all of these global issues and challenges, I feel fine. I really do. I feel fine. So why do I feel fine? Am I insane? Is it early onset dementia? Am I just a hopeless optimist? In light of all of these issues and problems and challenges, why do I feel fine? Well, I'll tell you, I feel fine because I am surrounded by innovators like you. Creative and resourceful people, problem solvers, capable of not only solving and overcoming the challenges in their business, in their life, in their work, but capable of thriving no matter what the circumstances are and may be in the future. Because let's face it, let's be honest about this, the rest of this decade, and quite likely the rest of this century, is going to be a roller coaster of Disney World proportions. And so the way I see it, there's two ways to tackle great problems, right? The first one is you do nothing, you hope for the best, and you hope that someone else solves it for you. Now, the advantage of that approach is that you can't make any mistakes, right? It's comfortable. But the disadvantage is that you're outsourcing your destiny to someone else, some unspecified third party, they, them, whoever they may be. Now, the better way, the more powerful way, in my view, is to take charge and use the inner resourcefulness that we all naturally possess to come up with smart solutions. And that is called innovation. And it's a skill that is perhaps more important now than ever before. But innovation isn't primarily about technology. That's a big and common misconception. Right? When you mention innovation, people automatically seem to think you'll be talking about metaverses and artificial intelligence and blockchain. And unless you have a specific interest in those fields, like I do, I'm a total nerd. But unless you have an interest in those fields, your eyes tend to glaze over. Now, as you can see in this video, resourcefulness can lead to smart solutions that really don't depend on that much time and energy cost and technology to begin with. Innovation is about thinking differently, and that trumps technology, as you can see in the video. It's about unlocking the pent-up creativity and rising above the idea that making mistakes and experimenting is a bad thing. And that's a skill that's both in short supply, but is absolutely critical for the survival, not just of our businesses, but of our world and our civilization. So why doesn't innovation happen naturally across all industries? Why is it such an elusive concept and something that is usually done by them, by others, just not us? And one of the answers that I think is one of the most profound answers to that question, but nonetheless true, is an important one. And that's the fact, the reality that productivity and creativity cannot coexist. So let me repeat that because it's really important, and just mull that over after the session and let me know what you think about it. Productivity and creativity cannot coexist. You're either executing or you're contemplating. Not both, at least not at the same time. But typically most of our time is focused on output, on performance, on productivity, because that's been the prevailing method for success in much of the previous century. But this ethos of just get stuff done, produce, and don't contemplate, don't think too much, just get it done, it leaves very little time for the disciplines that we require to survive in the 21st century, which are empathy, which I'll talk about, ideas, ideation, and experimentation. We all know this concept, and most of us, I think, will agree instinctively that it has a lot of truth to it. You give a person a fish, feed them for a day, teach them how to fish, you'll feed them for a lifetime. But the reality is that most of our professional lives aren't modeled on that wisdom. Most modern businesses still heavily rely on outside help to innovate and to transform. And that is fine to an extent. There's nothing wrong with getting help. But by doing so, we surrender autonomy and control of our destiny to someone else. Now, wouldn't it be amazing if we could empower ourselves and our teams and our companies with a flexible mindset and a methodology for driving change and innovation over and over again? Because the great problems of any age, including this one, aren't solved through knowledge, but through imagination, as that beautiful quote by Einstein illustrates. Imagination is the bedrock of innovation. And teaching people how to unlock and leverage their imagination in a structured and collaborative way is what innovation and design thinking are really about. Now, design thinking and innovation fundamentally rest on three pillars. You might have heard of a 5 or 6 stage process, but I want to go deeper than that. I want to give you the real foundations of this, which is age old: empathy, creativity, and experimentation. Let's dive a little bit deeper. So to do that, I want to actually tell you a story. I want to take you on a first class, all expenses paid trip to San Francisco, right? It's just for the purpose of this thought exercise, but okay, let's hope you join me. So I think we can all agree that opera isn't necessarily the most accessible of art forms, right? And so many opera houses have found it really hard to entice a younger generation of people to come and spend a night at the opera. And so too at the San Francisco Opera. Now, the San Francisco Opera, like many opera houses, is a serious organization with a long and proud history, a very structured and organized operation with a very clear decision-making hierarchy. Because the San Francisco Opera, after all, promotes a form of perfection manifested in these incredible performances that involve endless rehearsals and detailed production values, leaving nothing to chance. All of that to say that the San Francisco Opera House is not the kind of organization or company that likes to make mistakes or fail or improvise. But faced with the reality of dwindling audience numbers, especially in younger demographics, in the early 2000s, they decided to take to the streets, literally take to the streets, to get a first-hand feedback through observation and surveys from the community. So rather than try to solve the problem from the boardroom, as is the norm still for the majority of companies, rather than try and solve it from the boardroom, they instead ventured out into the community to ask lots of questions and to observe people's reactions. And in speaking with lots of people, they started discovering some really unexpected insights. Insights they likely would have never, ever uncovered from the comfort of their fancy ivory tower there in San Francisco. I'll get back to what those insights were. But first, I want to delve a little bit deeper into the concept of organizational empathy, because that's the kind of empathy we're talking about in design thinking, right? It's not necessarily just the empathy between individuals. We assume that most of us can empathize, that none of us are sociopaths. Organizational empathy is a very different concept. It builds on that, but it's different. Most of us and most companies are in the business of delivering value, right? That is the essence of a company, of an organization. But more often than not, and very often with the best of intentions, we tend to be distributors of information, which is to say we curate, we compile, and we organize information for our customers or our audience, our community, with the intention of providing value, right? And in doing so, most often, we tend to be senders of information, not receivers. We tend to inform, not question or interview. I mean, ask yourselves, what is the last time that you went into your customer base or your audience, however you define it, and instead of telling them what to do and informing them, you ask them what they think you should be doing for them. And it's by reversing the dynamics of that relationship that can have really profoundly positive consequences for the future success of your organization, by allowing the flow of information to effectively reverse, which is what happens when you ask questions instead of always providing the answers. You achieve what is likely the most important modern customer experience, which is your audience feels heard and understood. Asking questions is the best way to make people feel that you care about them, which is the best way to be memorable, which is the lifeblood of any company in a noisy world full of distraction and competition. And we all know what that's like. In my case, it's a while ago now, but imagine a first date. It's usually the people asking more interesting questions of us that we find the most memorable, right? It's by virtue of them asking us more interesting questions that we find them more memorable. The same principle applies here. But organizational empathy demands a willingness to admit that you may not have all the answers. It demands a level of vulnerability, more so than most organizations are still willing to display or used to display. But if you can muster the courage to be vulnerable and to admit that maybe you don't always have all the answers, and instead tap into the wealth of feedback and observations that reside within the community, then you may well discover needs, very powerful needs, that can transform into ideas that can become innovations, and innovations that can become or change the fortunes of your company. That's the power of organizational empathy. Now, but asking questions and surveying your audience, as important as that is, it's while much better than not doing anything at all, it's still not enough. The most powerful driver of enduring innovation is based on a concept and on the discovery of what we call latent needs. Latent needs. And latent, the word latent means hidden, right? And in this case, it refers to unexpressed needs. The kind of needs that people will never tell you that they have because they're not comfortable expressing them. They don't know how to share them or where to share them, or very often because they don't really consciously know that they even have those needs. And I want to give you an example from a big company that used this innovation principle and used design thinking to tap into this latent need discovery. I'm going to play that for you now.
About 10 years ago, we got approached by one of the largest oral healthcare companies in America, a company you've probably heard of called Oral-B. And they said, look, we'd like a new kids' toothbrush because ours is starting to get commoditized. It looks like a lot of kids' toothbrushes out there, and you can't have that. We want to be special, right? So we say, okay, we'll do this. We want to go out in the field and do some field research. And they're kind of not sure about that. Like, it's not rocket science. We're talking about kids brushing their teeth. How hard could that be, right? They would really like us to stop fooling around and start designing, right? But we want to go through this process, this observation process, because we think almost always you can spot opportunities. And so we go out and we're on like the first day of observations and we make a small discovery. Small discovery we make is that every kid's toothbrush in the history of the world has had the same implicit assumption. It's a logical assumption. It just isn't exactly right, which is the assumption always was parents have big hands, kids have small hands. And so when you want to make the kids' version, make it like the parents' brush, only smaller and skinnier. Perfectly logical until you go out in the field, until you actually watch humans, little tiny humans, brushing their teeth. And what you notice right away, you get a 5-year-old boy brushing his teeth. He's not holding his toothbrush in his fingertips the way mom and dad do. He's fisting it. He's holding it like this because he doesn't have the dexterity. He doesn't have the fine motor controls that his parents have. And so he's got to hold it like this. In fact, the other thing he does is he holds the brush too far up very frequently. And so he's punching himself in the face as he's trying to brush his teeth. And we solved that problem too. But the main thing was, came back in the field and said, uh-oh, kids don't need little skinny toothbrushes. Kids need big fat toothbrushes, right? Let's make them big fat squishy toothbrushes. And you may have noticed now every toothbrush company in the world makes these, but our client reports that after we made that little tiny discovery out in the field, sitting in a bathroom watching a 5-year-old boy brush his teeth, they had the best-selling kids' toothbrush in the world for 18 months. So when you think about power, when you think about, credibility, if you could go out in the field and do that observation and come up with that finding, and your company, your organization was the best in its field for 18 months afterwards, would that be worth it? I think that would be worth it. And so that's this message about think like a traveler, be an anthropologist, use your powers of observation, have that part of your brain turned up as high as you can all along.
Across Africa, women traditionally carry heavy water containers on their heads to collect water for daily use. That's been true for probably hundreds of years. Now, carrying 25-liter buckets of water multiple times a day is extremely detrimental. Not to mention really just hard to do, but it's extremely detrimental to the health of youth and elderly and disabled alike. And it increases the risk of infection every time they visit a water collection point. But this has been the norm in much of Africa and many other parts in the world for hundreds of years, and it still is. Now, one of my favorite innovations of the last 30 years, genuinely, is one that's almost entirely predicated on this idea that, first of all, innovation isn't primarily about technology. And secondly, that listening to the community, or even better, venturing out to observe people and discover the latent needs that they may not know how to express is the root of enduring innovation. And this is what that looks like. This is one of my favorite innovations of the last 30 years.
United Nations have just released statistics of about 2.1 billion people that do not have access to water in their homes. And that implies that every one of them needs to go and collect water from some point and bring it back home.
In all the trips we've done out into these communities, being part of the handovers and connecting with the people on the ground, you start to become aware of the idea of being able to choose your struggle. Then you go and see what a lot of people suffer with in rural Africa and other parts of the world, where they don't have that choice of struggle. That is their daily lifestyle.
With me being there, I was just in awe, an absolute element there. And seeing them in that exact same place, but not seeing it in the same way because they're struggling. So growing up with it and seeing them struggle in that area, it hit home for me.
We kind of do whatever it needs to be done. I mean, we're a small team, so no task is above any of us.
Improving access to water is really what Liparola does. More water means a better quality of life, better hygiene, better health. unlocking time is a critical factor. Some people have this perception that communities living in a rural area have all the time in the world. That's not true. Children can't get to school on time because their job is to go and fetch water in the morning. So that impacts negatively on the quality of their education, which limits their opportunities for getting employment afterwards. Many households are trying to have some kind of a food garden where they can grow their own vegetables for their sustainable living. And it's really subsistence farming is what we're talking about. So with the Hippo roller having more water available, makes it more viable to grow vegetables on a larger scale.
Africa Foundation have got 4 programs, and one of the program is to try and improve people's health. They are helping us as Africa Foundation to achieve our goals. If funding was not a challenge, we will give everybody a Hippo water roller in the community, and life will be much better.
The second pillar of innovation thinking, of design thinking, is ideation. Now, ideation is defined as the capacity for or the act of forming ideas. And if you think about it, an idea is a very powerful concept.
An idea. Resilient, highly contagious. Once an idea has taken hold of the brain, it's almost impossible to eradicate. An idea that is fully formed, fully understood, that sticks. Right in there somewhere.
Have you ever had an idea that you thought, well, quite frankly, was quite brilliant? An idea that could have been a business of its own, or at least a transformative part of an existing business, but ultimately an idea that you never acted on for fear of failure or lack of resources, lack of time, fear of what other people might think of your crazy idea. Sounds familiar probably to most of us. And the reality is that ideas are in fact the sparks of consciousness that set us apart from all of the other creatures on this beautiful earth. And how exactly ideas form in the brain neurologically, we don't even fully understand. But what is clear is that ideas, much more than knowledge, propel us forward as a species. Remember, imagination, not knowledge, is the bedrock of innovation. And this beautiful quote by Maya Angelou, you can't use up creativity. The more of it you use, the more of it you have. It's like going to the gym and building muscle strength. And the best way to have a great idea is to have lots of ideas. The problem is that most organizations don't have what I like to call creative safe havens, neutral zones where there is less emphasis on hierarchy, on judgment, and on authority. And this is problematic because great ideas can originate from the most unlikely of people at the most unlikely of times, but only if those ideas find a welcome climate to thrive. I promise you that within each of your organizations, there are dormant ideas locked away in the recesses of the minds of your teams, waiting to be discovered. And some of those ideas may change the fortunes of your company and your career trajectories. But are you mining those ideas? And are you creating an environment where imagination and ideas can flow freely, regardless of titles, seniority, and rank? And you may think, as many of us do, as many CEOs do, that your organization is too big and too complex to manage the kind of freewheeling and free-thinking environment that fosters innovation and encourages creative thinking. But there are large companies out there that really do understand this, that the best way to predict the future is to create it. The best way to predict the future is to create it. And one of those companies is called IKEA. And IKEA is one of my favorite human-centric innovation companies in the world. And while an environment like the one I'm about to show you, which you can see the picture of here, Space 10 in Copenhagen, while this environment is maybe unrealistic for most companies, I hope it demonstrates that creative safe havens are not some woolly and nebulous concept, but a key aspect of business in this century. Take a look.
This is IKEA's Future Lab. It's a space in downtown Copenhagen where researchers are creating a sustainable future by changing the way we live, work, and eat. Space 10 was founded in 2015, and its aim is to imagine just what the future may look like. It works with specialists, experts, and creatives from around the world to create projects that it hopes will make the world a better place to live. Its concepts include futuristic IKEA meatballs, made from insects, lab-grown meat, or food waste, that may become the meatball of tomorrow. A virtual reality app that lets you place IKEA furniture in your home before buying it. Even an on-demand, driverless cafe, shop, or office that makes its way to you at the push of a button.
IKEA is a company that many people around the world, they know about, but like any other company, they are extremely keen on finding new and better ways and more sustainable ways of creating a better everyday life for people. And what we basically do is that we are research and design lab, and we try to understand where the world is moving and try to find ways of making it better, basically. I think for many people, research is seen as a little boring and facts and data, and nobody really seems to get super excited about it. We try to collaborate not just with data scientists and researchers and academics, but also with designers and creatives to translate that into something that people actually give a damn about.
Space 10 showed us the project it's currently working on, a model village that is completely self-sufficient when it comes to electricity.
So all the solar panels will be connected to a computer underneath the houses, and you will be able to see which houses are selling and which houses are buying power.
The beauty of this project is also that you could see that this little village or community would actually be more a thing where everybody chips in a little bit. The energy from the community, the money goes back into the community. So you have a more democratized way of actually distributing and buying energy.
Space 10's experimentation continues in its test kitchen, where the foods of the future are dreamt up.
We do a lot of funny, weird, novel explorations within the field of food. And one big challenge is that we throw tons of food away each year. And it's often actually perfectly fine. And one thing I know for sure that a lot of people are throwing away is spent coffee grounds. And facts are that when you brew a cup of coffee, you actually only use 2% of the nutrients that are in there. Explored a little bit growing mushrooms. There's no mushrooms yet, but as you can see, the fungus is kind of growing. These are for oyster mushrooms. And then you basically just mix it with the spent coffee grounds. And then when it turns completely white, you add another layer of coffee grounds. And then you just follow the process. When it hits the surface up here, you remove these, the mushroom will start to flower. It's also these shortbreads, coffee grounds, and
Simon showed us how he makes a dogless hot dog, a meat-free recipe that has just as much protein in it as a normal hot dog. The hot dog is one of the recipes in Space 10's new cookbook, and it uses the blue-green algae spirulina as a protein source. Spirulina is one of the fastest growing organisms in the world. It's easy to digest, full of iron, and contains around 60% protein. The hot dog itself is replaced by a dried and glazed carrot, along with a beetroot ketchup. It's served with hydroponically grown leaves and salt and vinegar sprinkled insects. Each element is designed to be sustainable, but also tasty. So what did it actually taste like?
So I think this is probably the most sci-fi thing that I've ever eaten. It doesn't taste at all how it looks. It looks like it tastes very green, very healthy, but it's not. It's just a sort of, as you said, like an explosion of flavors. Yeah. They don't taste of that much themselves. They're kind of slightly nutty. The salt and vinegar is really nice. A nice snack on the side.
Space 10's ideas are experimental, And you may not be eating an algae hot dog next time you visit IKEA, but these projects might just be a look at the future to come.
It's become very clear that there is no one future. There's many futures based on the many people and countries and cultures around the world. And I think that is, I think what we will see in the coming years, that we will probably move away from this consolidation of very few platforms or very few visions of how the world should be, or how we should dress, or what we should eat, or what we should say, and where we should do it, towards, you could say, a more distributed future where technologies, the science, businesses, societies and communities, they will understand that they actually have the power to do something in their own world and their own society, and that will drive many different developments.
I've eaten far more challenging things while living in China, so I would definitely have one of those hot dogs. I don't know about you. So this idea, this combined force of feedback from your customers or your audience, which is empathy, organizational empathy, combined with the free flow of ideas from within an organization, ideation, is the ultimate recipe for renewal, reinvigoration, and innovation in this decade. So I really urge you to create the space and freedom for your people to express their ideas freely and frequently. Maybe you can't set up an innovation lab like that, but you can do a sort of soft, lower version equivalent of that, because you may just find that the innovation that propels your organization into the future was hidden in plain sight all of this time. Now, I want to go back for a moment to the San Francisco Opera. So remember that we said they went out into the street, they ventured out into the street to ask people questions, to take an interest. So gathering all that feedback from the street side interviews, the team was able to distill some really interesting and somewhat surprising conclusions. See, it turns out that the majority of young people that they spoke to had absolutely no issue with opera as an art form itself. So they didn't think it was boring, uncool, or inaccessible. In fact, many of them expressed more than a willingness to attend one of these performances. What held them back, what they found out, what held them back wasn't the art form itself, but the perceived complexity of the etiquette surrounding opera. They just weren't sure what the rules were, how you're supposed to behave, how you're supposed to dress, and how you avoid committing some horrible cultural faux pas in front of your friends. So leveraging the feedback from their customer base by displaying genuine organizational empathy, they were able to uncover some needs and fears that until then had remained hidden. And embracing those learnings, instead of pretending to know in advance what people want, allowed the San Francisco Opera to run some really interesting experiments, unlike any they had run in the past. And I'm going to show you what that looked like. But before I do, I want to get to the last pillar of innovation thinking, of design thinking. The last pillar is experimentation. See, customer feedback, empathy, leading to new ideas, ideation, is still utterly useless unless converted into a manifest idea, a manifest solution, rather. And unfortunately, that's where most organizations get stuck. Most organizations that make it even this far don't actually end up manifesting, realizing their ideas. Why? There's a number of reasons, but here's a very, very big one. It's a really big one. And this one is about leadership. Fundamentally, innovation thinking, design thinking, innovation itself is about leadership. The same admirable personal quality often found in people like yourselves who run and manage and are part of these wonderful companies is the same quality is a tremendous weakness on an organizational level in the 21st century. And that quality / weakness is perfectionism. See, for most of us, something dramatic happens around the time when we reach our teenage years in most cultures, and we go off to what we generally call high school. And there we're immersed in the doctrine of perfectionism. We are told that the key to success is always in preparing and hedging risk and in mitigation. And we're led to accept that in our future, our professional success will be dictated by our ability to always plan very carefully, to only execute when as much risk is removed as possible. Otherwise, don't begin. Avoid failure, right? Probably sounds familiar. But before that shift happened somewhere in our teenage years, we apply a very different doctrine. We apply the doctrine of experimentation, except when you're 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, nobody calls it the doctrine of experimentation. We call it play, right? We call it play, and we don't know that we're doing it. It's just our natural state of being until it is extracted and replaced by the doctrine of perfectionism. And yet it is trivially easy to demonstrate that a culture and a mindset of continuous low-risk experimentation lies at the root of some of the most successful products and creations in history. I want to give you a few examples. What you see here behind me, this is a napkin, or placemat, whatever you want to call it. And this dates back to a lunch in the mid-1990s in a small diner in California in the United States, where a director and 3 writers from the movie Pixar, from the production house Pixar, had a lunch together, like all of us have lunches. But rather than just have lunch and talk about business, they do what they naturally do. They start doodling, they start sketching, they start, that word there, ideating. They start freely coming up with ideas. There's no judgment, there's no inhibition, no nothing. That lunch, that particular lunch in 1994, I think it was believed, led to 4 films that are beloved around the world, that grossed more than $1 billion at the box office. And those films, I don't know if you can see it, that was A Bug's Life, Finding Nemo, Monsters, Inc., and WALL-E. You can probably recognize Toy Story, but that already existed. Grossing over $1 billion combined. That must have been great food. This ugly thing, right? Someone in 1945 had the idea and the audacity to build some electrodes into an ugly wooden bucket, the one you can see behind me, in an attempt to launch an electric rice cooker. Massive failure. It burned all the rice and it never even made it to market. But it led them to pivot to other experiments over and over again. So they had the audacity to realize that. And this small band of ideators and experimenters would later be known by the name that we now all know, which is Sony, right? That's that effect of ideation. Now, finally, let me return one last time to the San Francisco Opera, because I promised to go back there. And so based on the feedback of the community, and as a result of multiple ideation sessions where no idea was deemed too crazy and everything was welcomed, they settled on an experiment. So rather than try and coerce people to dress up and be fancy and come and spend the night at the opera, which they hadn't really been succeeding at, they decided to bring opera to them. So they rented a downtown venue, barely more than a warehouse with some chairs and table and some projection screens and all of that. And then they sent invites across social media. And when the doors opened, a queue of more than 400 people stretched around the block in the Mission in downtown San Francisco, the exact demographic of people that they had failed to capture until then. And I want to show you. So the performers, for example, they were dressed in casual clothes. And they placed a song wheel by the stage so people could spin the wheel to pick the next performance. They had photo booths. They had battling song divas, two opera divas sort of conflicted in song. And it was an enormous success and a really perfect case study, in my view, of what can happen when innovation thinking is introduced even into the most conservative and most risk-averse of organizations, which the San Francisco Opera definitely was. And here's a short video of what that actually looked like.
Opera is too often thought of as like something that's not for everyone, and like what's more for everyone than like hanging out at a great spot in the Mission drinking booze and listening to opera.
I wouldn't say it felt like I was at the opera. I felt like a really big party with like friends performing their favorite songs.
How many of you guys actually been to the opera? Oh, that's more than I expected. Next time, come and watch Rigoletto.
It's probably the best event I've been to the opera in a long time.
I wish people knew that opera can be really passionate, even though you may not know or speak the language. It kind of transcends that. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, but I enjoyed the opera music. I did. I'll come back because I really like tonight. And we're actually trying to bring more people with us when we come back.
We're pretty dressed up compared to the rest of the books.
It's just more relaxed. You can wear whatever you want and enjoy the music and not have to feel like you're in a kind of stiff environment.
Addio, addio, speranza e l'anima. Solo tu sarai, sarai.
I think the best part of the night was when the married couple got on stage and sang. That was just the best.
Thank you guys. It's been a great audience. Have a great night.
Fantastic, no? So empathize, ideate, and experiment. These are the age-old pillars of innovation. That's been true for thousands of years. That's nothing new. Now, before we close this session, and I want to go to you as an audience, see if you have any questions or any thoughts or insults for me, more than welcome. So before we close, I wanted to share one more case study. One more example of what happens when these three principles are applied together. And I find this one of the most moving and meaningful examples of design thinking and human-centric innovation that I've ever uncovered. And it's a serious subject, but with a redeeming outcome. And that is the following. Let me just go to the next slide. So this gentleman behind me his name is Doug Dietz. He's an American, and he used to work until very recently for General Electric. And he was the principal designer and engineer of MRI machines. Now, he's very proud of that. And MRI machines are important because they provide a non-invasive way of visualizing the internal structure of the human body, which is really important, obviously, in medicine. But nobody wants to be in an MRI machine, right? That's fair to say, because it usually means there is potentially a serious illness to be investigated. And it would be a scary experience for most of us, for any of us. But it takes on a whole different level of stress and terror when a young child, for example, I want to talk about children here, when a young child already facing the possibility of or reality of serious illness has to go into one of those. Now, Doug was very proud of his work, but he never really saw it that way until he did. Thanks to an understanding of the principles of design thinking that he acquired during, I think it was a Stanford course with IDEO. And I want to show you what that was like from his perspective.
And I was so excited to see this, the first product that we installed. So I went to see it in its actual environment in the hospital. So I was just running through this hospital to check out my new product that I had just finished. I'm really excited. And I kind of almost like barged in, took my wallet and all the metal stuff out of my pockets, and ran in and was, with my baby, and I was just a proud papa, basically. And I remember the technologist coming in and saying, we have a patient that's going to be coming through. So could you step out for a little bit? I said, sure, no problem. I'll come back in. We can talk later. And I remember walking out and I was standing in the hallway. And this is kind of what I saw down the hallway. I saw this young family coming down the hallway, and I'm just standing in the hallway, and they're coming toward, and I can tell as they get closer, the little girl is weeping. And as they even get closer to me, I notice the father just leans down and just goes, remember, we've talked about this. You can be brave. And they turn to walk into the MR suite, and I kind of follow them in. And I still remember it like it was today, guys. I'm standing behind the little girl. She's probably about 7. And I'm looking into this environment that I was just standing in. I was just in there in this environment, just, doing my happy dance, right? And she just freezes. And looking at her angle and just seeing in that same environment where I was just standing, I realized that this is something totally different. On the wall is that, horrible warning sticker. It's got the magnet and the big exclamation point. It's got that yellow and black tape, like on the thing, like, almost like a accident scene. Everything looks really kind of like beige. It's got this kind of weird colored flooring and, just kind of everything's bleached out. And then the room itself is kind of dark and it kind of has those flickering fluorescent lights. And the machine itself that I designed basically looked like a brick with a hole in it. And then of course, an MRI for you folks that have had one, it is just a terrible noise. So the little girl just starts to really cry. I mean, she's just breaking down. And I can tell you guys, I'm standing behind and I see these parents. And for you guys that are parents, they're looking at each other. And they don't have to say a word because they don't know how they're going to get their child through this.
So that's a very serious subject, as I told you, but I also promised you a redeeming outcome. And that's where I want to end the presentation. And I will go to questions if you have any. So the question here was fundamentally, and this is an art that you learn when you get into innovation, is to structure a problem statement, which is not as easy as it sounds. But here the problem statement is, how can we make the MRI experience less frightening for children? And the answer was beautiful, right? And it's narrated, I'm going to let someone else give you the answer. It was narrated by David Kelly, who's one of the founders of IDEO, who work with Stanford on courses on design thinking. IDEO, in a way, although innovation and these pillars are age-old, IDEO sort of came up with design thinking as a methodology. So to give you some context, this is David Kelly giving you the second part of this story.
Doug was really disappointed to learn that nearly 80% of the pediatric patients in this hospital had to be sedated in order to deal with this MRI machine. Right? And this was really disappointing to Doug because before this time, he was proud of what he did. He was saving lives with this machine, but it really hurt him to see the fear that this machine caused in kids. About that time, he was at the D School at Stanford taking classes. He was learning about our process, about design thinking, about empathy, about iterative prototyping. And he would take this new knowledge and do something quite extraordinary. He would redesign the entire experience of being scanned. And this is what he came up with. He turned it into an adventure for the kids. He painted the walls and he painted the machine and he got the operators retrained by people who know kids, like, children's museum people. And now, so when the kid comes, it's an experience. And they talk to them about the noise and the movement of the ship. And when they come, they say, okay, you're going to go into the pirate ship, but be very still because we don't want the pirates to find you. Right. And the results were super dramatic. Right. So from something like 80% of the kids needing to be sedated to something like 10% of the kids needing to be sedated. And the hospital and GE were happy too, because you didn't have to call the anesthesiologist all the time, they could put more kids through the machine in a day. So the quantitative results were great. But Doug's results that he cared about were much more qualitative. He was with one of the mothers waiting for her child to come out of the scan. And when the little girl came out of her scan, she ran up to her mother and said, "Mommy, can we come back tomorrow?" Right. And so
Okay, so I think that's a beautiful conclusion to this session. Hopefully you'll agree with that. So empathize, ideate, and experiment. I'd like to now open the floor to questions. Also, if anyone wants a copy of the recording, I did record this. I will put my email in the chat right now. Then please do send me an email and I will be happy to share the recording with you. There you go. And please, if you have any questions right now, please, the floor is open, unmute yourself and go right ahead. Some messages on chat. Yeah, thank you for an exit. Thank you very much. I'm glad you found it inspiring. That's what we're here for. So please, if you haven't already, please do connect to me on LinkedIn. That's where I tend to be very active, post a lot of content about innovation and other topics related to that. You have my email address in the chat if you want a copy of this. I can send a copy of my bio as well, if that's useful to you. Please do keep in touch. So someone is asking in the chat, love your videos, thank you. And the new thinking, how do we help those who need to think this way, want to, but don't know where to start? You train them on it. A simple answer, one that you would expect from me. You train them on it. This is a skill that can be acquired, right? We cannot, us innovation coaches, trainers, advisors, name us what you will. We cannot perform magic. We can't turn people into Da Vinci's. But the good news is we don't have to, right? None of us here, presumably, don't hope I'm not insulting any MRI engineers here. None of us here are capable of building an MRI machine. All of us here, presumably, would have been able, at least in theory, to come up with turning that hideous room into something enjoyable for kids by putting stickers on the machines, right? So it's not about, the hurdles are far lower than people think. It's about training people to see things that way or think different in Apple speak. And that's the short answer. The long answer will take me about 6 days, so I won't do that. Bart is asking, how do you define a business case to present to the C-level? Are there any sources that present results? How do you define a business case? Present results, I mean, as you know very well, Bart, it's very difficult to predict the outcome of an innovation cycle. You have to first get buy-in from the C-suite to actually go through that iteration cycle for an amount of time. They have to be willing to allocate an amount of time and amount of budget that is far less restrained than what they're used to come up with these solutions. That's what IKEA's innovation lab is all about. That said, yes, there are ways of convincing the C-suite and using tools that can really help them structure the business case. And things that we train on are dry sounding things like net present value, impact effort matrix, things like that. They're mostly visual and also financial tools that allow us to at least come up with a sensible and reasonable anticipation of what to expect. There's no guarantee in innovation, as you know as well or better than I do, but there are certainly tools. And a big part of that, second part of the answer, I would say, is part of what we train on is not just empathy, ideation, experimentation, but I put a heavy emphasis when I get involved, for example, on pitching, because none of those pillars are valuable unless you know how to sell your idea to the stakeholders, unless you can convincingly put that in front of people and get what I like to call buy-in from them. So it's a combination of some of those visual tools and analytical tools, impact effort matrices and stuff like that, with the ability to pitch, which most people, pardon my French, really suck at. So that's a skill that you have to develop as well in people, alongside the rest. Any other questions? Please go ahead. My absolute pleasure. Someone is asking, Liora is asking, how would you suggest that organizations ensure that creativity and productivity exist together? The short answer, again, in a nutshell, in this session would be to create a creative safe haven. It doesn't need to be a physical place the thing that you saw, the concept that you saw that IKEA did, Space 10, this warehouse in Copenhagen, is an extreme example. This is not reasonable for most companies, but you can create creative safe havens, either in space, in time, or both. In time, I mean allocated hours, an hour a week, even an hour a month, where you hop on a joint call where it is understood that that's a creative safe haven. In other words, what is expressed there, ideas that are expressed there, are not discussed outside of the haven, so that there is no ridicule, so that they don't take on a life of their own and evolve outside of the scope of the safe haven. So you can do that in time, an hour a month, on Zoom, whatever you want. And you can do that in space, allocating an actual physical space, preferably both. That's essentially what Space 10, the innovation lab, is. So that's effectively what you need to do. What that means, a creative safe haven, is hard for me to define for each individual organization because there are too many dynamics at play, but it is doable, right? And the biggest companies in the world do it. Apple does it, Google does it, Microsoft does it. They do it all the time. It's no coincidence that they are the most valuable companies in the world. So I hope that answers some of it. Just seeing if there's any other questions. Great, really inside the industry. Okay. Yeah, well, wonderful. I mean, you're very welcome, everyone. If you have any further questions about this, please feel free to email, reach out on LinkedIn. This certainly isn't meant to be the end of this. It's meant to be a beginning of something. So reach out if you want to have a follow-up chat with me. Reach out if you need any of this information, case studies, the video, whatever you need. I'm here to help. And then I'll finish today with a bit of Beatles, because why not?
Here comes the sun, here comes the sun, and I say it's alright. Little darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun, and I say it's alright. Little darling, the smiles returning to the faces. Little darling, it seems like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun, here comes the sun, and I say it's alright. Sun, 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 here it comes. 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 Little darling, I feel that ice is slowly melting. Little darling, it seems like years since it's been clear. But here comes the sun, here comes the sun, and I say it's alright. Here comes the sun, here comes the sun, it's alright.